The neon lights of the city flickered against the midnight sky, their glow reflecting off the rain-slicked streets. The world never stopped moving, but for him, Ethan Carter, it had come to a screeching halt. He stood at the edge of a crumbling rooftop, staring down at the chaos of life below, the honking cars, the laughter of strangers, the indifferent world that had never once paused for him. It had all led to this moment. Every broken promise, every forced smile, every time someone had looked at him like he was a backup plan. He had given everything, his time, his loyalty, his heart, only to be discarded when it was convenient for them. But tonight, something inside him had snapped. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a crumpled note, a message from her. The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of every betrayal he had ever endured. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I never meant to hurt you, but I think we should just stay friends." He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. Friends. That word felt like an insult, a consolation prize for someone who had poured his soul into something real, only to be treated like a spare part. The truth hit him like a freight train. He was never a priority. Not to her, not to his so-called friends, not to the bosses who only noticed his hard work when they needed something extra from him. He was an option, a second thought, a convenience, but not anymore. A world that never cared. Ethan had always been the guy people called when they needed a favor. "Hey, can you cover my shift?" "Ethan, I need help moving." "Bro, you always give the best advice. What should I do?" They came to him when it suited them, but the moment he needed something, silence, excuses, vanished like ghosts in the wind. Then there was her, Sophia, the girl he thought was different, the girl he had given his heart to, only to realize he was nothing more than a temporary distraction, a placeholder until she found something better. He had watched it happen in slow motion. The unanswered texts, the canceled plans, the way she laughed a little too brightly with someone else. And when he finally asked her point blank where he stood in her life, she had smiled, kindly, pitifully, and said the words that had shattered him. "You're one of my closest friends, Ethan. I don't want to ruin what we have." What they had. What did they have? A one-sided illusion? He had nodded, pretending it didn't hurt. But deep inside, something dark had stirred, a realization. People didn't value what was always available. They didn't cherish what they believed would always be there. And he was done being an afterthought. The transformation. Ethan didn't go home that night. He didn't reply to her message. Instead, he walked through the rain, through the streets, through the alleys where forgotten ones whispered truths the world refused to hear. And then he found himself in front of a mirror, a dirty, cracked mirror in a rundown bar where lost souls gathered. He studied his reflection, the tired eyes, the forced smile, the face of a man who had spent his life waiting for others to choose him. But something was different now. He smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "They treated me like an option." He ran a hand through his hair, straightening his jacket. "Then I will leave them like a choice." That night, Ethan made a decision. He wouldn't be a convenience anymore. He wouldn't wait for people to see his worth. He would make them feel his absence. He turned off his phone, deleted her number, unfollowed, unfriended, and walked away without a single word of explanation. Because when you treat someone like an option, you don't get the privilege of closure, a silence louder than words. The first few days, they didn't notice. They were too busy with their lives, too wrapped up in their own worlds. But slowly, the absence began to sink in. Messages came in. "Hey, Ethan, where have you been? Haven't heard from you in a while. Bro, are you ignoring me?" And then, finally, her, "Ethan, I feel like you're avoiding me. Did I do something wrong?" He read the messages and put his phone down. They had their chance. They made their choice. And now he was making his. Silence. The power of walking away. Ethan started focusing on himself. He hit the gym, started reading again, took up projects he had abandoned because he was too busy being everyone's emotional support system. And something incredible happened. For the first time, he felt free, no longer chained by the need for validation, no longer waiting for people to see him, to choose him, because now he chose himself. And in that choice, he found something he had never expected: power. Not power in the way the world defined it, not control over others, but power over himself, over his time, over his worth. And then came the real twist. The people who had once treated him like an option, they started noticing. They started reaching out, realizing that something was missing. Because people don't value what they believe will always be there. They only realize its worth once it's gone. And by the time they did, Ethan had already moved on. A new chapter. One night, as he sat on his balcony, watching the city breathe beneath him, his phone buzzed. A name he hadn't seen in a while. Sophia. He stared at the screen, the message sitting there like a ghost from a past life. "Ethan, can we talk?" He smiled, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with understanding. He had already answered, by walking away, and he wasn't turning back. The city had a way of erasing people. One day, you were the center of someone's world. The next, you were just another shadow blending into the noise. Ethan had once feared that fate, becoming invisible, but now he embraced it. He was no longer waiting, no longer seeking validation. And yet, something curious had begun to happen. The moment he walked away, the people who had dismissed him started to notice his absence like an open wound. His inbox, once a graveyard of unanswered messages, had come alive with apologies, concerns, and half-hearted attempt to rekindle what was already dead. And now there was the message from Sophia. "Ethan, can we talk?" He stared at the screen, the weight of her words lighter than he had expected. Months ago, those 5 words were shaking him, ignited a desperate hope. But now, they were nothing more than letters on a screen. He set the phone down without replying. She had made her choice, and now he was making his. The echo of regret. Days passed. Weeks. Ethan had built a new routine, one that didn't revolve around anyone but himself. Mornings at the gym, evenings working on his business ideas, late nights filled with books, and the quiet hum of a life finally lived on his terms. And yet, the echoes of his absence continued to ripple through the people who had once overlooked him. He ran into an old friend, if you could even call him that, at a cafe. Jake, the guy who had always come to Ethan when he needed a listening ear, but had never been there when Ethan needed the same. "Man, I feel like I haven't seen you in forever," Jake said, sipping his overpriced coffee. "You've been good." Ethan smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just been busy." Jake nodded, but there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of realization, a recognition of the change in Ethan. "Look, I know I wasn't always the best friend, but we should hang out again, like old times." Old times. The words felt foreign now. Ethan simply nodded. "We'll see." And then he left, walking away before Jake could say anything else. He had no interest in reliving the past. Sophia's second chance. One evening, as he stepped out of his apartment, he saw her. Sophia. She stood near the entrance, her arms wrapped around herself as if shielding against the cold. But Ethan knew better. It wasn't the weather that made her shiver. It was regret. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, her eyes widening with something he couldn't quite place. Surprise? Relief? "Ethan." Her voice was softer than he remembered, almost unsure. He stopped a few feet away. "Sophia." She hesitated, then took a breath. I know it's been a while. I miss you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Before, he would have melted. He would have grasped onto the hope that maybe, just maybe, she had finally realized what he was worth. But now he only felt calm. "I was always here," he said simply. "You just never saw me." She swallowed, guilt flashing across her face. "I know, and I'm sorry." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I didn't appreciate you the way I should have." He studied her for a moment. The old Ethan would have been desperate to hear those words. But the man standing before her now, he didn't need them. "People don't appreciate what they think will always be there," he said. "But I'm not an option anymore, Sophia." A silence stretched between them. And then he did the one thing she never expected. He walked away. Not out of spite, not to hurt her, but because he finally understood his worth. And he would never let anyone treat him like an option again. The power of leaving. Ethan never looked back. Not because he didn't care, but because he had learned the most valuable lesson of all. When someone treats you like an option, you leave them like a choice. And in that choice, you find freedom. You find yourself. And that is the greatest power of all.